Hi, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for joining me on this evening's Type 2 webinar podcast for the Type 2 members on this lovely evening. My name is Andy. I'm the clinical lead here at Redicare. And in this evening's session, actually, I just want to revisit the basics of achieving Type 2 remission, putting your Type 2 diabetes into remission, particularly for those who've just joined the program. Okay, so a couple of the main points that I always like to get across are around food choices. Excuse me. And actually, when it comes to food choices for type 2 diabetes, it's pretty straightforward. It's a very easy way of remembering it. A couple of key concepts that I want you to bear in mind. And those key concepts are, first of all carbohydrates turn to sugar. This is really important. So, excuse me. So, all dietary carbohydrate is metabolized as glucose, which is sugar. So type 2 diabetes is a problem with high blood sugar levels. So what we need to remember is that you can look at sugar in foods and that has some merit. But if you're looking at total carbohydrate in a food, that's going to tell you, should you or should you not choose that particular food. By the way, before I go any further, if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to the channel over here and click the bell notification over this side. And that bell notification will allow you to get a notification 10 or 15 minutes before we go live and then when we go live so that you remember. But it's always Thursdays at 7:30. Okay, all carbohydrates turn to sugar. So all dietary carbohydrate is metabolized as blood sugar. This is a hugely important concept because people often say to me, what about sugar-free granola? What about diabetic chocolate? What about low sugar XYZ food? If that food is a carbohydrate based food that's low in table sugar, it's still really high in sugar by the time it hits the blood. So carbohydrates and sugar, for all intents and purposes, should be considered the same thing. And type 2 diabetes is carbohydrate intolerance. It's the inability to eat carbohydrate without the pancreas struggling and your blood sugar levels going high and getting small blood vessel damage to your blood vessels, to the small blood vessels around the body. So we know that all carbohydrates are metabolized as sugar, all digestible carbohydrates, that is. The next key concept to understand is that most people, for context here, before we talk about this, take in about 300 to 400, maybe 500, even more for some people, grams of carbohydrates a day, which equates to about 100 to 150 spoons of sugars worth in your blood. And then we wonder why we have a type 2 and diabetes epidemic, or a diabetes syndemic, as it's called. So less than 100 grams of carbohydrates a day is referred to as low carb. Now, anywhere under 120, 130 actually will still elicit very good results. But the general definition is less than 100 grams of carbs is considered low carb. Less than 50 grams of carbohydrate is considered very low carb, which some will refer to as ketogenic. Excuse me while I fix my mic. Okay, that should be better. So if you're looking to lose weight, lower your blood sugar levels, and put your diabetes in remission, it's very straightforward. You just have to keep an eye on those numbers. So often someone will say to me, can I eat this food or that food? And here's the answer to that question. Does it fit into your goal amount of carbs? So if you're looking at the back of something, it's amazing, actually, even when you explain it a couple of times, the food industry has intentionally made food so difficult to interpret that you would look at something. I had a patient of mine say to me last week, what about these wraps? And they were like, this has happened a couple of times, they're like 60 or 70 grams of carbs per 100, really high in carbs, but they were marketed as, low sugar, no added sugar, low calorie, healthy, whole grain, multi-seed. All of these are just kind of misleading, disingenuous types of marketing and labeling. So ignore everything you see on the front, turn the product straight to the back, look at the carbs, not of which sugars, the total carbohydrates. So if that's something like 70 grams per 100 and you're trying to stay below this figure we talked about a while ago, 50 grams of carbs a day because you're trying to be very good, one of those wraps being 30 grams of carbs, probably not a good choice. You should look for something that's lower. So that's kind of how you decide, should I eat XYZ food? So people will say to me, what about sugar-free beans? The answer is, look at the carbohydrates on the back and see, can you fit that into your 100 grams of carbs a day or your 50 grams of carbs a day, whichever one you personally are striving for. My own approach is always with patients to go very low carb, which is less than 50 grams. But then worst case scenario, if you're coming in at 60, 70, 80, max 100. It's not the end of the world, but I do prefer my patients to stay below 50. It makes the process easier. It makes you adapt to a low carb diet much quicker, and it's also much better for your blood sugar levels and your weight. Okay, so another thing to remember is that calories are not all equal. So actually looking at calories and intentionally trying to restrict your caloric intake is not a good approach. The reason I say that is if you're trying to stay below 2,000 calories a day, but you're eating bread and rice and pasta, obviously that's going to be bad for diabetes, and chocolate and crisps and cakes. That food actually makes you hungrier. So you'll notice this. I know, for example, if I have 2 bars of chocolate and half a tub of ice cream, I'd be a bit sick for about 45 minutes and then I could go again. The same thing wouldn't happen if I was eating breasted chicken and avocado. So calories are not all created equal. That's very important. So don't pay too much attention to the caloric value in foods. Okay, so that's carbs under 50 or 100 grams. Calories not being created equal. Another really important concept is you don't want to go mad on fats. Now, this one pertains more to weight loss as opposed to diabetes reversal. And by the way, those two are not necessarily tied. You don't have to lose weight. They can actually be mutually exclusive. You don't necessarily have to lose weight to reverse diabetes, which is counter to what a lot of people will tell you. A lot of people will say, oh, you have to lose loads of weight to reverse diabetes. You don't. You have to reduce your processed carb and sugar intake, which usually results in a lot of weight loss. I had a wonderful example of what's known as an isocaloric case study, an intervention, where I had a patient who was 8 stone 6 or 8 stone 7 when she started. And she said to me, I can't afford to lose weight, nor do I want to lose weight. And it wasn't clinically indicated anyway. So we kept her calories very, very high. So she had loads of fats, loads of protein, big portion sizes, ate all the time, didn't lose a pound, reversed her diabetes, reversed her high blood pressure, and came off her medications. So the two don't always have to be hand in hand, but they usually go hand in hand, because what works to lower your blood sugar levels will usually result in weight loss, unless you're putting your calories really high, which is a lovely segue to unintentional, all the same, segue to the next part, which is don't go mad on fats. Now, your body has 2 fuel sources that it can use. It has glucose, which is carbohydrates broken down, and it has fats in the form of ketones. Now, when you lower your carb intake, which is glucose, your body says, well, what else am I going to run on? And it starts to learn to build the metabolic machinery, as they say, to burn to burn ketones, which are fats for fuel. Now, if you go low fat as well, if you go really low fat and low carb, you leave your body with nothing. So that's not a good idea. You do need some fats. And a real striking example of your body not having any fuel to run on is something, and you can look this up on Google, called rabbit starvation. So where a tribe can only find rabbits and they can eat lots and lots of rabbits, they will starve. They'll actually die, because food is not food. You need vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and so on. So fat is essential. If you only have pure protein to survive on, you won't be able to. You'll actually get malnutrition and die. So what I would say is you're going low carb, you're going high in protein, and you're going moderate in fats. You don't want to go too mad on fats. The reason you don't want to go too mad on fats comes down to kind of metabolic signaling. So what I mean by that is, if you say to your body, I'm restricting carbohydrates, so your body says, well, I can't run on carbs anymore because there's only 20 grams of those, 40 grams, 50 grams of those coming in. So I need to understand how to burn these things, how to burn fat for fuel. Now, if you bring your fats way too low, you're going to deplete energy. You're going to be low on energy. But if you leave your fats too high, what your body says is, why would I bother burning body fat when you're giving me loads of fat from cream and eggs and cheese, like way too much to get through? So if your caloric intake is a little bit too high because you're overdoing it on the fats, your weight loss will stall. I've experienced this a number of times with patients, where the patient is 7 or 8 weeks in, they've lost 18, 20, 22 pounds, whatever the number is, 10, 12 pounds, doesn't matter. And they get to a point where the weight loss stops. And I review their food diary. And I had one particular gentleman, I'm sure he won't mind me saying, I won't say his name, but he was he was driving a truck, I think, or a taxi, something like that. And he was saying, I do have nuts during the day. I wonder, is it that? And I said, what are you having? He said, pecan nuts. And I said, how much? He said, 500 grams, which is the big bag, like you'll get in Aldi or Lidl. And I think it was about 1,400 calories worth of nuts that he was snacking on during the day, plus his other 2,000 calories. So you need to be in a caloric deficit to lose weight. If you accidentally overindulge in fats, it will absolutely, for sure, it will slow down weight loss. So just be careful. The ones that I see people running into trouble with are nuts, because You eat 6 or 7 nuts. It's so easy to eat a full bag, or eat loads of them. The other one is cheese, and probably the worst offender is cream in your coffee. So now, having said that, I do advise people to put cream in their coffee. But if you're putting it in like you would milk, it's very easy to suddenly have 1,000 calories gone into your day. So again, calories are not the be all and end all, but you do need to be in a caloric deficit to lose weight. Now, the way to end up in a caloric deficit is not to intentionally restrict your caloric intake. That doesn't work, because if you do that, look, this is the trying to think of the right way to phrase this. This is the skinny world approach. If you just restrict your caloric intake and you just count your calories and you're down to 1,100, 1,200 calories a day, what happens is your body says, cool story, I'm going to down regulate your metabolism. So adjust it and slow it down to you only requiring 1,200 calories. Now, when you finish up in skinny world and you go back a couple of months later and you go back up onto 2,000 calories, which you need because you're starving all the time and you work through skinny world as well, you were just depriving yourself of food, your metabolism doesn't catch up and all the weight goes back on. And this is the biggest loser phenomenon, where people on the biggest loser program in the US, where they lost hundreds of pounds. I mean, some of these people lost 8, 9, 10 stone, and all the weight goes back on because of the damage that 4 hours of exercise and extreme caloric restriction does to your metabolism. The correct way to do it is teach your body to burn its own body fat. Okay, and this is really important as well, and I'll finish on this and let you back to your lovely evening. Reduce your meal frequency. So this idea that we should eat little and often is an idea that is not grounded in any empirical or objective clinical literature or any science. In fact, a lot of it, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. That's a marketing slogan from the food industry. It was invented in 1917 by John Harvey Kellogg to sell their newly invented breakfast cereal. So breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Not true. Not true. And the idea that we should eat little and often for weight loss, not only is it not true, it's not supported by any science. And the actual exact inverse of that, where you eat large meals in reduced frequency, like once or twice a day, is grounded in tons of science, something known as intermittent fasting, where reduced meal frequency elicits lipolysis, which is a fancy way of saying fat burning. So if you want to lose weight, these are the keys, and reverse diabetes for that matter. Reduce your carbohydrate intake. Keep your carbohydrates down below 50 grams a day at best, 100 grams a day at worst. Do some exercise, practice some intermittent fasting, get enough sleep, stay hydrated, get some vitamin D into you, so get out in the sun and keep yourself safe when you do it. Reduce your meal frequency. Try not to snack too often, and moderate your fat intake. And what I mean by moderate is you need some fat. You do need butter, cream, cheese, fatty meats, whatever they are, but don't go mad in them. Don't just snack on cheese all day long because, we said on the program it was okay to have cheese, or add loads of cream into your coffee, or snack kind of mindlessly on nuts because nuts are okay to have. Just be careful with fats. So there's 3 really easy way of a really good acronym, CFP, that will help you. Sorry, PCF. P, prioritize protein. So protein first always. F is for fill up on fat, and C is for cut carbs. So you cut your carbs, you prioritize protein, and you fill up on the fat. You add a little bit of fat. So if you're looking at a plate, for example, that might be you're putting a big ribeye steak. So you've got your steak, you've got some fat in it. So it's prioritizing the protein. You're cutting your carbs by having the low carb vegetables like your spinach, cauliflower, broccoli, and you're filling up on fat by adding butter to your vegetables, for example. So you need some fat. Fat is really important. It is in no way at all whatsoever deleterious to human health. And by that, I mean saturated fat like red meat, butter, cream, does not, counter to popular belief, and this is supported by lots of literature over the last while, does not adversely affect cardiovascular disease. In fact, we won the 2020 International Scholar Award from the American Heart Association for showing that every measurable parameter for cardiovascular health that you see in your bloods and in your doctor's check gets better, not worse. HDL cholesterol, triglycerides, blood pressure, waist to height ratio, and so on and so forth. Everything gets much better, not worse. So key things to remember: carbs below 50. If you're wondering, should I eat XYZ food? Look at the back of it. Look at total carbs, not of which sugars, and see, can I fit that into my 50 grams a day and still have a little bit of wiggle room? Do a little bit of exercise. It doesn't have to be intensive. Reduce your meal frequency down to 2 meals a day, or even 1 meal a day if you can get up to that point. But certainly aim for 2, and minimize snacking as well. That will help. And just be careful with the fats. Just don't overdo the fats and you should be fine. So I hope that's been useful. It's nice to have a refresher, even if you're on the program for a while. It's lovely to get that kind of a little bit of a reminder and put everything in perspective, because often we overcomplicate diabetes reversal and we make it much more complicated than it needs to be. It really doesn't need to be complicated once you keep all of those basics in mind. I hope that's been helpful, guys. Go in, enjoy your evening, and I will see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.